I didn't know it yet, but that empty seat next to mine was the beginning of everything. I don't know if you believe in fate, but sometimes I feel like the universe has a strange sense of humor. And that morning, or better said, during that rushed boarding for Flight 127, I was just an ordinary woman, trying to make it on time to a work event in Seattle. Hair pulled back in a messy bun, backpack slipping off my shoulder, and my mind, far, far away. It all started at Gate 23 at JFK, when the agent announced the start of boarding. I was exhausted, makeup-free, just praying to get a window seat so I could sleep through the next 8 hours. It had already been a long day. I wasn't in the mood for talking, for exchanging glances, for anything. Just a quiet flight, but it's funny how the simplest plans are the first to unravel. When I reached my seat, 22A, if I remember right, there he was. Gray t-shirt, headphones around his neck, and that kind of gaze that looks lost in thought, yet strangely aware of everything. He stood up as I approached and smiled like we already knew each other somehow. "Looks like we're in the same row," he said, with a soft accent and a smile that was almost shy. I nodded, trying not to seem affected. After all, he was just a stranger. "Nothing more." "Excuse me," I mumbled, brushing past him to get to the window seat. I tucked my backpack under the seat, pulled out a book, mostly to pretend I was busy, and leaned my head against the window. But I never even opened the book. The flight was delayed by 30 minutes on the tarmac, and to make it worse, a storm was approaching New York. I think it was somewhere between boredom and the flight attendant's announcements that we started to talk. His name was Daniel. He was a photographer, or trying to be, as he put it with a laugh, and was on his way home after a stretch in New Orleans. He spoke with this calm, unhurried tone, like someone who didn't mind letting time do its thing. "And you?" he asked. After a while. "Do you live in Seattle?" "No, I'm from Boston, but I'm heading to a design conference," I replied. "Design, huh? So maybe you see beauty in places no one else notices." I smiled. Automatically, shyly, but genuinely. The kind of smile that slips out even when you're trying to keep your guard up. And then, the plane took off. The first few minutes were smooth. But soon, the turbulence hit. The kind that tightens seat belts against your stomach and causes silent glances to cross the cabin. A child cried a few rows back. The flight attendant walked by, balancing herself with practiced grace. And I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. That's when I felt it. His hand, over mine, not forceful. Not forward. Just a simple, human gesture. One that said, "I'm here too." I opened my eyes and looked at him. "You seem calmer now," he said, like it was the most normal thing in the world. "And are you always like this?" I asked, half laughing, half nervous. "Only when I'm sitting next to someone who looks braver than me." I can't really explain what happened in the hours that followed. It felt like the storm outside had wrapped us in a bubble. We talked about everything. Books, favorite cities, love stories that didn't work out. We even shared silly fears. His was escalators, mine was locking myself out of my apartment. 8 hours. 8 hours that felt like 2 long coffees on a rainy afternoon. The kind of conversation you don't want to end. And when they announced we were starting our descent, I wished, with everything in me, that there was more time. I had no idea what fate had planned once we landed. But up there, between the clouds and the turbulence, I knew something inside me had changed. If you believe in the power of love, don't forget to follow for more stories like this one. I never thought I'd tell this story out loud. For years, it lived only in my memory, quiet, tucked away in a drawer I rarely dared to open. But some moments, they don't fade. They wait. And now, all these years later, I realize maybe it was never meant to stay hidden. That flight, those 8 hours, they changed the course of my life in a way I didn't fully understand until much later. When we landed in Seattle, it was pouring. The kind of rain that makes the runway shimmer like glass. People rushed to grab their bags, stretch their legs, turn on their phones. That strange dance of strangers untangling from shared space. Daniel stood up first and offered me a hand as I pulled my coat from the overhead bin. "Do you have someone picking you up?" he asked, casually, as if the question didn't carry. "Wait, no, I'll just grab a cab," I answered. "You?" He smiled. "No one's waiting." There was a pause. That delicate space where something should be said, but neither of us knew what. Looking back, I think we both felt it, that invisible thread pulling at our chests. We walked together through the terminal. Slowly. Not because of the crowd, but because we didn't want it to end. "Not yet," he told me. He had a layover. 2 hours. Before his next flight to Portland. I told him I had to head straight to my hotel, check in, and prepare for my presentation the next morning. "I wish I had more time," he said, stopping near a row of vending machines. "To talk. To just be." "So do I," I replied. And I meant it more than I could express. He looked at me then, really looked. His eyes weren't just brown, they were full of stories I hadn't heard yet, and then, something happened. A voice over the intercom called for passengers on a different flight. It wasn't ours. But in that tiny second of distraction, I glanced down to check my phone, just a blink. And when I looked up again, Daniel was no longer beside me. I froze. Spun around. But the crowd had thickened. People moved like tides between terminals, and he was gone, just gone. I remember my heart racing as I searched the space around me. Maybe he had stepped aside. Maybe to the restroom? Maybe he'd gone to grab coffee? But minutes passed, then more. And that thread, that fragile little thread, felt like it had snapped. I waited by the vending machines for 20 minutes. Then by the windows near his gate. I even passed by security again, hoping I'd see his gray hoodie or that camera bag slung across his shoulder. Nothing. It was like he had evaporated into the hum of 1,000 people moving on with their days. I never got his number. I never even knew his last name. All I had was his first name. Daniel. And 8 hours that felt like a lifetime. I went to my hotel that night in a fog. I kept thinking, there has to be a reason for this. Maybe we'll run into each other again. Maybe this is just part of the story. But the days passed. I gave my presentation. Flew home. Weeks turned into months, and I stopped waiting for the moment I'd see him again. Still, I never forgot. Some people leave footprints so quietly that you only realize the mark they made once they're gone, and Daniel, he left an entire map across my heart. I returned to Boston changed, though I didn't fully understand how yet. Everything around me looked the same, my apartment, my office, the coffee shop on the corner, but I wasn't the same woman who had boarded that plane days earlier. Daniel's name became a whisper in my thoughts. A gentle hum beneath my everyday life. Not loud, but constant. Like background music to everything I did. I would catch myself scanning faces in crowds, looking for brown eyes that held the weight of unsaid things. I would wonder, more times than I cared to admit, what might have happened if I had asked for his number, or if I hadn't looked away at the wrong second. It's strange, isn't it? How someone can be with you for such a short time and yet leave something behind that never quite leaves. I told no one about him at first. Not my best friend, not even my sister. It felt too fragile, too magical. Like saying it out loud would make it vanish. Like if I tried to explain, people would nod politely and secretly think I was overreacting about some cute guy on a plane. But it wasn't that. It wasn't just attraction or charm or a moment. It was something else. Something that felt familiar and brand new all at once. I've never believed in soulmates, not really, but something about that flight made me question everything I thought I knew about timing and connection and fate. I started writing in my journal again. Something I hadn't done since college. At first, I just wrote about my trip, about the conference, about Seattle's rain. But he crept into the pages, uninvited but welcomed. I wrote about our conversations, our jokes, the exact way he held my hand during turbulence. I wrote the way he listened, not just hearing, but truly listening, as if my words mattered more than the noise of the world around us. Sometimes I wondered if he was writing too. A part of me hoped he was looking for me the same way I was quietly looking for him. That maybe he told his friends about the girl in seat 22A. That maybe he Googled design conference Seattle May Boston woman flight 127 or something just as desperate and silly. But time passed. Life moved forward, as it always does. I dated again. Men who were perfectly fine, some even wonderful, but I couldn't help comparing. Not out loud. Just in the quiet way your heart does when it remembers something it can't replicate. It wasn't fair to them. Or to me. But I couldn't help it. Daniel had become a question mark at the end of every sentence in my love life, and still, I never saw him again. Years went by. I got promoted. Moved into a bigger apartment. Bought new furniture. Painted my bedroom navy blue. The kind of things that make you feel like you're building something. But some nights, I'd lie in bed and wonder if I had imagined it all. If maybe he wasn't real. If that connection was just my heart, starved for magic, inventing something to hold on to, but deep down, I knew he was real, and what we felt. That was real too. Then, one ordinary Thursday, something extraordinary happened. I was working late, headphones in, editing some design layouts for a client. It was raining, again, and I had a podcast playing in the background. A new one I'd never heard before. It was about missed connections. People telling stories about strangers they had loved for a moment and lost. I almost didn't notice when it started. I wasn't paying close attention, but then I heard the voice, his voice, asterisk. At first, I froze. You know those moments when time slows down, and everything around you fades, emails, deadlines, the sound of traffic outside your window? That's what happened. The moment his voice came through my headphones, it was like the rest of the world pressed pause. It was him. Daniel. I didn't have to guess. I didn't need to rewind. I just knew, his voice hadn't changed. Still low, warm, thoughtful. He had the same rhythm, the same way of pausing slightly before finishing a sentence, as if measuring each word for weight and meaning. I hadn't. heard that voice in years, and yet it felt like it had never left me. The podcast was called Moments That Stayed. The episode title? 8 Hours Above the Clouds. My heart thudded so hard, I thought it might drown him out. I pressed pause. I stood up from my desk, pacing, hands trembling slightly as I grabbed my phone and restarted the episode from the beginning, this time, listening with my entire body. It started gently. Hi. My name is Daniel. I've never done anything like this before, but there's this story I've carried with me for years. And I think it's time to let it out. I sat down on the edge of my bed. I didn't realize I was crying until I tasted salt on my lips. It was a flight from New York to Seattle. May, a few years ago. I don't even know exactly how many now. But I remember everything else. He remembered the weather, the delay, the storm clouds gathering just as we took off, the crying child a few rows back, the way the turbulence made his stomach lurch, and how, somehow, reaching for my hand made it all feel manageable. He remembered me. I never believed in that whole click thing, he said in the recording, his voice quieter now. That idea that you could feel something real with someone you just met. But then she sat down next to me. My chest ached. I clutched a pillow to my body like it could hold me together. I don't know if she remembers me. I don't even know if she ever thought about me again. I never got her number. I never knew her last name. Just that her name was Olivia, she lived in Boston, and she made 8 hours feel like a lifetime. I gasped. He said my name. My real name. Not just that girl or a woman. He remembered. There's not a day I get on a plane that I don't think about her. And maybe she's moved on. Maybe she's married, or halfway across the world. But on the off chance she hears this. Olivia, I'm sorry I disappeared that day. I didn't mean to. There was a gate change. I went to grab coffee while you were checking your phone, and when I came back, you were gone. Tears streamed freely down my face now. I walked through the terminal like a madman. I checked the gate you were supposed to go to. I even asked at the desk if anyone had seen you. But airports don't wait for broken hearts, do they? That line, felt like it had been etched into my bones before he ever said it out loud. I've looked for you, he continued. Online. Through mutual friends. Even Instagram. But how do you search for a woman named Olivia from Boston, with eyes like storm clouds and a laugh that makes the world feel softer? I had never felt so seen and so invisible at the same time. So, this is me, letting it go. Or maybe, holding on a little longer. Just in case. The episode ended. I sat there for a long time, staring at my screen. The replay button hovered beneath. His voice. And all I could think was, this wasn't over. He remembered everything. He had searched. And now, after all these years, he had spoken his truth into the world, and I had heard it. What do you do when fate hands you the thread again, after you thought it had snapped? I didn't know yet, but I wasn't about to let it slip through my fingers a second time. I didn't sleep that night, not even a minute. I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, Daniel's voice echoing through my mind like a song I couldn't turn off. I replayed the episode 3 more times, each listen peeling back a different emotion: shock, joy, grief, longing. How could so many years fit into a voice that still made my heart ache? There was a kind of sacred silence in the apartment. The kind that only happens when the past shows up uninvited and pulls up a chair beside you. It was as if time had bent backward, folding that flight, that rain-soaked terminal, and the 8 hours between rows 22A and B into the same room with me again. I kept thinking about how close we had been. How we had been in the same place at the same time, and lost each other in seconds. One coffee stop. One gate change. One glance away from the world we might have had, and now he was out there, still searching, still remembering, and I was here, listening. I didn't know what I was supposed to do. I wasn't sure if reaching out would be a mistake, or the only thing that would make sense after all these years, because the truth is, time had passed. I had changed. I was no longer that 20-something woman who boarded a plane thinking sleep was the best way to pass 8 hours. I had built a life. One with routines, responsibilities, stability. But no matter how solid my life looked from the outside, something had always felt slightly unfinished, like there was a chapter one never got to read. Daniel had been that chapter, and now, he was a page open again, waiting. I opened my laptop and pulled up the podcast's website. There was a contact form. Generic. For questions, submissions, or media inquiries, but something inside me told me it didn't matter. This wasn't going through publicists or producers. This was for him. I just had to speak from the place where it still hurt, and still hoped. My fingers hovered over the keys. My heart raced. What do you say after years of silence? How do you put longing into words without sounding dramatic, or foolish, or desperate? I took a breath, and I began. Hi. I'm writing because I listened to your most recent episode. And I think I'm the Olivia you were talking about. Even typing it felt surreal. It's been years. I wasn't even sure if you were real, sometimes. But the moment I heard your voice, I knew. I remembered the way you held my hand during turbulence. The way you asked if I lived in Seattle. The way you made 8 hours feel like a lifetime, too. My hands were shaking. I never stopped wondering what happened to you that day. I thought maybe I'd imagined it all, that I'd made it into something more than it was. But now I know. I wasn't alone in that. You felt it, too. I paused, biting my lip. What next? What did I want from this? Closure? A reunion? Or just the chance to say thank you for remembering me when I didn't even know I needed to be remembered? If you're open to talking, I'd like to hear more of your story. And maybe tell you mine. I stared at the screen for several minutes before hitting send. My stomach twisted as the message whooshed into the void of the internet. No confirmation. No auto-reply. Just silence. I closed the laptop and stood by the window, watching the rain blur the city lights. My reflection looked back at me, older, maybe wiser, but still carrying something soft for a boy on a plane who once reached for my hand without asking. That night, I dreamed of clouds and coffee. Of airport gates and quiet glances. Of what-ifs and almosts. And somewhere in the middle of all that fog, I dreamed of Daniel, standing in the terminal again, this time waiting just a little longer. I didn't expect a reply so soon, honestly. I didn't expect a reply at all. I had sent the message in the early hours of the morning, when the world was still quiet and the city felt like it was holding its breath with me. By the time the sun rose, I had already convinced myself that maybe he wouldn't see it. Or if he did, maybe he wouldn't believe it was really me. I tried to go about my day like everything was normal. I took a shower, made coffee, answered emails. But everything felt hollow, like I was moving through someone else's routine. I kept checking my inbox, refreshing over and over as if that would somehow make the universe move faster. It didn't until it did around 4 in the afternoon, as I was halfway through editing a layout for a new client. I saw it, subject, 8 hours above the clouds. I stared at the screen for a long time before clicking. My hands were already trembling by the time the message opened. Olivia? Just that. My name. Sitting alone on the first line. I read your message 5 times before I let myself believe it was really you. I didn't know whether to laugh, cry, or drive straight to Boston. Tears sprang to my eyes immediately. I thought I'd lost you forever. I thought maybe I imagined what we had, that connection, that ease, that crazy feeling like I'd known you forever when we'd only just met. But hearing from you, it's like the ground opened up beneath my feet in the best possible way. I'm sorry for disappearing. For real. I got up to grab a coffee, and when I came back, you were gone. I checked everywhere. I must have passed by your gate 3 times before security told me I couldn't stay. I went home to Portland feeling like I'd ruined the best thing I never got to have. His words sank into me, slowly, like warm rain. You said you'd like to hear more of my story. I'd love that. And I want to hear yours, too, everything. Where life took you. Who you became after that flight. Because I've thought about you all these years, Olivia. More than I ever admitted. If you're open to it, I'd like to talk. Really talk. Maybe even meet, if that doesn't feel too crazy. No pressure. Just hope. Daniel. I pressed my hand to my mouth, my heart pounding so hard it felt like I'd just run a marathon. I didn't know whether to scream or sob or both. It was surreal, the kind of moment that only lives in movies, or novels, or wild, impossible dreams, but this wasn't a dream, this was happening, and suddenly, all the pieces I had buried beneath layers of time and logic and what could have been started rising to the surface. He was real, the memory was real, and now, this second chance, whatever it was real too. I didn't respond right away. I read his message over and over again, letting each word settle like dust in a room that had been locked up for too long. I needed to breathe. To sit with the weight of it. Because something deep inside me, something I hadn't felt in years, was stirring. Hope, not the naive, reckless kind. Not the version that lives in fairy tales or rom-coms. But the quiet kind. The one that waits. The one that knows love doesn't always arrive when you expect it, but sometimes it returns when you need it most. And so, that night, I wrote back, not with answers. Not with plans. But with a piece of the truth I had kept hidden for far too long. Daniel. I never forgot you either. The first message led to a second, then a third, and before I realized it, we were writing to each other every night, long emails that felt more like journal entries than conversations. We didn't rush. There was no small talk. No forced updates about the weather or work. It was deeper than that. Like we'd picked up a conversation that had only been paused, not ended. Daniel told me about his life since the flight. He was still living in Portland, still taking photos, mostly portraits and documentary work now. He had published a photo book, gone through a breakup, traveled to Iceland, and adopted a rescue dog named Leo who, according to him, snored louder than most people, but he didn't pretend his life had been perfect, and neither did I. I told him about Boston. About losing my mom the year after the flight, and how it had cracked something open in me I didn't know was fragile. I told him about the job I loved, and the nights I felt like something was missing. I told him about how I stopped believing in magic for a while, and how quietly, piece by piece, I was learning to believe again. What surprised me most was how natural it felt. No pressure. No need to impress or protect ourselves. It was like we'd already seen each other in one of the most vulnerable moments, stuck together in a turbulent sky, uncertain of everything, and somehow, that had created a space where the masks didn't matter. After a week of writing, Daniel asked if I wanted to talk on the phone, not text. Not email. Voice, just hearing each other. I was nervous. More than I expected to be. It felt fragile. Like something that had lived in my memory and now existed again in the present, and I was terrified to break the spell. But when I answered his call, and heard him say my name, Olivia, with that gentle softness, I remembered everything. Melted. We talked for 2 hours that first night, then 3 the next. By the third call, we were laughing again. I told him he still spoke too slowly when he was thinking, and he teased me for still biting my thumbnail when I was unsure of something. He remembered. I remembered. There was one moment that stayed with me more than the rest. He said, "You know what I regret the most, Olivia? That I didn't tell you back then that something about you felt like coming home." And for a second, I couldn't speak. Because I had felt it too. I just hadn't dared to say it out loud. Not then. He didn't ask to meet right away. Neither of us wanted to rush the moment. We were careful. Not out of fear, but respect. For what we'd felt. For what this could become. For what it already was. But every day, I found myself thinking about seeing him again. I imagined the airport terminal. His face in a crowd. That first real embrace. Would it feel the same? Would it feel new? And somewhere in the middle of all that wondering, something changed in me. I stopped feeling like I had missed my chance, because maybe this wasn't about lost time, maybe it was about the kind of love that takes its time, the kind that arrives when the heart is ready. The decision to see him again wasn't dramatic. There wasn't a movie moment where someone shouted across an airport or showed up at the door unannounced. It was quieter than that. More real. More tender. It happened one night while we were on a video call. Daniel was sitting cross-legged on his couch, wearing a faded hoodie and holding a mug that said "Caffeine first, talk later." Leo, his dog, was snoring somewhere out of frame. As usual, I was curled up in bed with a blanket over my shoulders, sipping chamomile tea, my laptop propped up on a pillow. We had been talking about nothing and everything. Favorite scents. Things we'd never done but wanted to. What scared us? What healed us? And then, between a pause and a shared laugh, I said it, "I'd like to see you." His eyes softened, but he didn't look surprised. like he'd been holding that same sentence behind his lips for days. "I'd like that too," he said, his voice just above a whisper. "More than you know." There was a stillness after that. The kind that isn't uncomfortable, but full of quiet electricity. As if the universe was holding its breath with us. We didn't plan everything in that moment. We were careful, thoughtful. We wanted to get it right. I offered to fly to Portland, but Daniel insisted on coming to Boston. "I was the one who disappeared, remember?" he said with a half smile. "Let me come to you this time." So we chose a weekend. Just a few days away. 3 days. 72 hours, but who's counting? The moment I confirmed the dates, something shifted in me. My body began keeping time differently. Every hour felt heavy with anticipation. I cleaned my apartment like I was preparing for royalty, not because I thought he'd care, but because I cared. I wanted everything to feel like a welcome. Like home. I rearranged pillows on the couch 6 times. Bought fresh flowers. Changed the sheets twice. I even stood in front of the mirror trying to decide if my favorite navy sweater looked too prepared. And swapped it out for something softer, and yet, no matter how much I tried to calm myself, I was terrified, not of him. Not of the moment, but of the possibility that reality might not match the memory. What if it was different? What if we had changed too much? But then I'd think about his voice. His words. The emails. The hours we had spent rediscovering one another, brick by brick. And I'd remind myself, this wasn't a fantasy. This was something we built together, slowly, gently, like hands shaping something out of clay. The morning he was set to arrive, it rained. Of course it did. Boston always seemed to rain on important days in my life. I took it as a sign, not a bad one, just familiar. As if the city remembered too. I stood by the window, watching the drops streak down the glass. My phone buzzed. "Daniel, just landed. Can't believe this is real." Neither could I. My heart was racing as I grabbed my coat and keys and took the elevator down to the street. I waited under the awning, scanning every car that passed. The wind was gentle, cool, and my fingers trembled even inside my pockets, and then, there he was, stepping out of a cab. A little older than I remembered. A little taller than I expected. Holding a small bag in one hand and looking around, until his eyes found mine. He smiled. I did too. We didn't run toward each other. There were no dramatic reunions. No sweeping music. Just 2 people who had waited a long time. Finally standing still in the same place. He walked to me slowly, and when he reached me, he said only one thing: "Hi." I nodded, "Hi." And then I stepped forward, and he opened his arms, and we held each other, just like that, like time had folded in on itself, like 8 hours in the sky had waited 8 years on the ground to find their way back. We didn't rush. That was the first thing I noticed. There was no frantic attempt to fill the silence or overcompensate for the time we had lost. Instead, everything between us unfolded gently, like sunlight creeping across a hardwood floor in the morning. Slow, soft, certain. Daniel stepped into my apartment like he had been there before. He looked around, smiled at the shelves filled with books and small framed photos, and said, "This place feels like you." I didn't ask what he meant. I didn't need to. He set down his bag, and we stood there for a moment. Just breathing. Taking it in. I watched him look at me like he was still trying to believe I was real, and I realized I was doing the same. We made tea instead of coffee. Neither of us was in the mood for anything harsh or jittery. We wanted warmth, calm, familiarity. He sat on the couch, and I curled up across from him with my knees tucked to my chest, just like I had done the first night we spoke over video. It felt right. We didn't talk about the years in between, not right away. There was no need to dissect the time lost. Instead, we talked about the little things, what songs had been stuck in our heads lately, which moments from the flight had stayed the strongest in our memory. He remembered the moment I reached for my book but never opened it. I remembered the exact sound of his laugh when he told me about being afraid of escalators, those tiny, insignificant things that only become significant when they live inside you for too long. After a while, we took a walk. The rain had stopped, leaving behind that clean, petrichor scent that always reminded me of fresh beginnings. We wandered through the quiet streets of my neighborhood, hands brushing now and then, hearts beating loudly in silence. At one point, he looked over at me and said, "You still walk like you're listening to music, even when you're not." It made me smile. Later that evening, we made dinner together. Nothing fancy: pasta, garlic bread, a bottle of red wine I had forgotten I owned. We moved around each other in the kitchen like we had done it 100 times before. Every glance felt like a question answered. Every small touch felt like memory restored. I remember how he stood behind me while I stirred the sauce, close enough for me to feel the warmth of him but not too close. Not rushing. Not assuming. And then, without turning around, I said softly, "This feels like something I dreamed." I felt him pause. "Me too," he whispered. That night, we stayed up talking until almost 3 in the morning. Curled up on the couch under a shared blanket, legs tangled, candles flickering low. We told each other truths. Not the filtered kind. Not the polished, first-date versions of ourselves. But the raw ones. The real ones. I told him how I had replayed the flight in my mind 1,000 times. How, for a long time, I had convinced myself I imagined the depth of our connection. That I thought maybe it had only mattered to me. He looked at me with something tender in his eyes and said, "You mattered. You mattered more than I knew how to admit at the time." And just like that, something inside me exhaled. A part of me I hadn't even realized was holding its breath all these years. There was no kiss that night. No fireworks. Just presence. Just belonging. Just two people relearning the shape of something that had never truly left them. As I drifted off with my head resting on his shoulder, I thought about how strange life was. How one moment, one seat assignment, one storm, one missed connection, could stretch across years and still find its way back, and for the first time in a long, long while, I felt found. The morning light came in quietly. It slipped through the blinds in soft streaks, casting golden lines across the hardwood floor. I woke up slowly, the kind of waking that doesn't come from alarms or urgency, but from comfort, the feeling of being exactly where you're supposed to be. Daniel was already up. I heard the clinking of mugs in the kitchen, the soft hum of a song playing from his phone, something acoustic and low, just background warmth. I stayed still for a moment on the couch, wrapped in the same blanket we had fallen asleep under, letting the reality of it all sink in. He was here, not in memory. Not in imagination. Here, I found him standing barefoot in my kitchen, hair still a little messy, pouring coffee into 2 mugs. When he saw me, he smiled like I was the first sunrise he'd seen in weeks. "Good morning," he said, handing me one of the mugs. It wasn't the words It was the way he said them, like he'd been waiting years to be able to say good morning to me in person. We sat on the floor by the window, sipping slowly, watching the light change on the rooftops. And just like that, without planning, the weekend began to stretch and unfold around us. We spent the morning walking through the Boston Public Garden. It was quiet, mist still clinging to the grass, ducks drifting lazily on the water. Daniel took a photo of me standing under a willow tree, not posed, not prepared, just me, smiling at something he had said. Later, we wandered through old bookstores. We took turns pulling titles off the shelves, reading the first lines out loud to each other and laughing when one was too dramatic or too dull. He found a worn copy of The Little Prince and bought it for me, writing inside the cover in small, careful letters, "For the girl who reminded me what it means to be seen." I didn't know what to say. So I didn't. I just looked at him. My eyes full, and he nodded, like that was all the answer he needed. That night, we cooked again, something simple, roasted vegetables, rice, and a sauce we made up as we went. It wasn't about the food. It was about the space between us. How it had grown so effortlessly, without force. How everything felt like it had always belonged. We ate on the floor, the table forgotten, 2 glasses of wine balanced on the coffee table, music low in the background. And when we were done, we sat in silence for a long time. Not the kind that comes from distance, but from fullness. I thought about this so many times, Daniel said quietly, his voice barely louder than the music. Being here. Talking like this. Looking at you without wondering if it was just a dream. I nodded, heart aching in that sweet, delicate way. Me too, I whispered, and then, he reached for my hand. It wasn't dramatic. There were no fireworks. No sudden rush of music swelling in the background. Just his fingers finding mine, holding them like he had been meant to all along. We didn't kiss. Not yet. Instead, we sat with it. The quiet miracle of finding each other again. The beauty of not needing to rush toward anything, because we had already waited so long. That night, when we said goodnight, he lingered at the door of the guest room. I watched him pause, hand resting on the frame, as if unsure whether to say more. "Thank you," he said finally. "For what?" I asked. "For not giving up on the memory of us." I didn't sleep right away. I lay awake for a while, the window slightly open, letting in the cool breeze and the soft sounds of the city outside. My heart felt different. Not heavier. Not lighter. Just steadier. Grounded. Like it had finally been given a place to land, and I realized something I hadn't admitted to myself before. Sometimes, the story doesn't have to be loud to be real. Sometimes, it just needs to be true. The last day arrived before I was ready to. I think we both felt it, the quiet countdown that begins when something precious has an end time stamped on it. The morning sun was brighter that day, almost in defiance, like the world didn't care we were running out of hours. Daniel had to leave in the afternoon. His return flight to Portland was scheduled for 4:15. Not early enough to rush the goodbye, but just close enough to make every minute feel like it was slipping through our hands. We didn't speak about it at first. We woke up slow again, tea, quiet music, the soft shuffle of socks on wood floors. We sat in the kitchen while he made eggs, and I sliced fruit, and neither of us talked about the suitcase that waited by the door. It was strange. This man, who had once been a memory I couldn't let go of, now moved around my space like he had always belonged in it. Like his presence didn't need to be explained. It just fit. After breakfast, we went for one last walk, back to the public garden. Like it had become our place. The leaves had shifted slightly in color since the day before, and the air had a sharper edge to it, as if even the season was changing alongside us. We didn't speak much during the walk. We didn't need to. There's a kind of closeness that words can't touch, where silence says more than conversation ever could. When we got back, Daniel took a slow breath by the window. His fingers tapped lightly against the glass. "I wish we had more time," he said. I turned toward him. "We do," I said gently. "It just won't always look like this." That was the truth, wasn't it? Love doesn't freeze in perfect weekends. It doesn't live only in candlelit dinners or morning tea or shared playlists. It lives in the effort, in the choice to show up, again and again, even when the schedules don't align and the cities are far apart. He turned to me, his eyes steady. "I don't want this to be the end," he said. "Not again." "It won't be," I replied, and I meant it with everything in me. We sat down at the kitchen table and opened our calendars, not because we had to, but because we wanted to. We chose dates, circled them with hope. Talked about me visiting Portland. About meeting halfway next time. About turning moments into patterns. Love, I was learning, isn't just a feeling, it's a rhythm. At 1:45, the car arrived. He zipped his bag slowly, pausing now and then, like he could stretch time if he just moved carefully enough. Before we walked downstairs, I asked him to wait. I pulled out the copy of The Little Prince he had given me the day before. Inside the front cover, beneath his note, I wrote, "Come back soon. I'm not done remembering you." He read it silently, then looked up, eyes misty, and said, "Neither am I." At the curb, we stood face to face. For the first time all weekend, there was tension. Not bad tension, just the kind that comes when something unfinished is being paused again. His arms wrapped around me tightly. We didn't speak. I felt his breath near my ear, and my heart beat so loudly I thought he might hear it. Then, finally, he pulled back, looked at me, and said, "May I kiss you?" The question caught me, not because I wasn't expecting it, but because he had asked. With such care. With reverence, almost, as if the answer mattered more than the moment itself. I nodded, and when his lips touched mine, it wasn't fireworks or trembling or cinematic crescendos. It was home. It was quiet, deep, honest. A kiss that said, "I remember. I see you. I'm here now." When he got into the car, I didn't cry, not yet. I just stood there, watching until the car turned the corner, and the street felt too still without him. I walked back upstairs, sat by the window, and opened my journal, and for the first time in 8 years, I didn't write about the flight. I wrote about everything that came after. The days after he left were quiet in a different way, not empty. Not lonely. Just stilled. It's hard to explain to someone who's never felt it, that soft ache of presence lingering in absence. The way a home can still echo with someone's laugh, even when they're no longer in the room. The way a teacup, left rinsed beside the sink, can look like a memory. That Monday, the city moved as if nothing had changed. Cars honked. Coffee shops filled. People brushed past me on the sidewalk, headphones in, eyes on their own stories, but mine had shifted. I went back to work. Opened emails. Sat through meetings. But something was different in how I saw the world. It was like a part of me had been woken up again, one I didn't even know had fallen asleep. I caught myself smiling at strangers more. Watching the clouds move outside my office window with the same quiet awe I'd once felt at 30,000 feet. The colors felt brighter. Music felt deeper. Even silence felt meaningful. I kept thinking about Daniel. Not obsessively. Not with desperation, just, constantly, his voice played in my mind like a familiar melody. I remembered the way he poured tea without asking how I liked it, just somehow knowing. The way he looked at me when I wasn't speaking, like my silence was worth listening to. The way he touched my hand like it was a page he didn't want to smudge. We texted, of course, little things, mostly, Daniel, I miss your window light. Me, Leo's snoring in the background of your voice notes is my new favorite soundtrack. Daniel, why does your city feel like home when mine doesn't right now? There were no declarations. No plans too big to keep, just presents. He sent me photos every morning. A cup of coffee. A tree outside his apartment. The street lamp he passed. On his walk to the studio. And with each one, he wrote a caption that felt like a sentence from a shared book we hadn't finished writing. This light reminded me of the way your living room looks at 4 in the afternoon. This bench feels like it's waiting. For us. This sky? You'd love the sky. I started printing them out, his photos. I hung them on a wall in my hallway with tiny gold pins, forming a quiet collage of a place I hadn't yet visited, but already felt connected to. I began to realize something: love doesn't always have to arrive like a tidal wave. Sometimes it's a tide, slow, faithful, persistent. Sometimes it grows not through grand moments, but through a string of small, honest ones, and yet, as the days stretched into weeks, a new kind of fear started to grow in me, not about him, but about us. What if the magic of our weekend was just that, magic, a rare alignment of time, memory, and emotion that couldn't be sustained in the weight of everyday life? What if we were idealizing something we couldn't possibly carry into the future? I didn't voice it, not right away. I didn't want to ruin something fragile by pressing too hard, but one night, during a call that stretched past midnight, I let it slip. I'm scared, I admitted. Daniel didn't answer right away. I could hear him breathing on the other end. Calm. Present. What part scares you? He asked. That we'll lose this, I said. That we'll try, and it won't work. That the distance will stretch too wide. That we'll go from something rare to something ordinary. There was a pause, then. I don't mind ordinary, he said. As long as it's with you. I cried, quietly, not because I was sad, but because I was starting to believe him, and believing, that kind of vulnerability, is the bravest kind of love I've ever known. The second time we saw each other again, it wasn't dramatic. There were no gates, no suitcases, no countdown clocks. Just a weekend. Chosen. Claimed. Quietly and on purpose. I flew to Portland. It was raining when I landed, of course it was. But this time, the rain didn't feel like a backdrop for a goodbye. It felt like a beginning. Daniel met me at the airport. No sign in hand, no big gesture. Just him, standing near the exit in a denim jacket, holding a to-go coffee with my name written across the cup in messy, slanted letters. I hadn't told him what I wanted, but somehow he'd gotten it right again. Hi, he said, like the word had been waiting for me in his throat for days. Hi, I whispered back. We hugged. The kind of hug that says I remember you, I missed you, I'm here now. The kind that doesn't rush to end. And then he took my bag and we drove, quietly, through the streets of a city I had only known through his photos. It was beautiful, not in the grand, postcard perfect way, but in the way that felt like him. Misty mornings, streets lined with trees that leaned into each other like old friends, bookstores nestle between cafes and corner markets. His apartment was exactly what I imagined: warm colors, shelves filled with photography books and half-burned candles, a record player in the corner. Leo barked once when I walked in, then curled at my feet like I'd always been part of the picture. We spent that weekend not chasing magic, but living it. There were no big plans. We grocery shopped together, walked along the river, cooked dinner while the windows fogged up from the warmth inside. He took photos of me without asking, quiet captures of me laughing, looking out the window, brushing my hair behind my ear. I noticed everything: the way he always poured his coffee last, after mine, the way he double knotted his laces without thinking, the way he paused before responding, as if filtering every word through his heart. We talked, yes, but we also didn't have to dop. There's a kind of closeness that exists in comfort, not just chemistry. And for the first time, I wasn't wondering if this would work. I was wondering how we'd make it work. Because I wanted to. And so did he. We made lists of places we'd go next, of books we wanted the other to read, of small promises: I'll call before bed, I'll visit in 2 weeks, I'll write even when I'm tired. It felt almost childish, like passing notes in class. But it grounded us, made it real. I met 2 of his friends that Sunday, and he introduced me simply as, "This is Olivia." No explanations, no labels, but the way he looked at me while saying my name was explanation enough. Later, as we sat watching the sky change colors above the city, I asked him the question I had been holding in my chest: do you ever think about the version of us that could have been? If we hadn't lost each other at the airport? He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I used to. All the time. But now, I think I'm more interested in the version we're becoming. That stayed with me, because he was right. We weren't trying to go back to something. We were building something now, not a continuation of the flight. Not a sequel to a memory, something entirely new. Love doesn't ask if you're ready. It shows up. It sits beside you on a plane when you're exhausted and guarded. It disappears in an airport crowd, then finds its way back through the quietest corners of your life. Love doesn't knock twice. But sometimes, it waits. Daniel and I began building something real. Not just weekends and visits and long calls that stretched past midnight. We began weaving the ordinary with the extraordinary, making space in our calendars, adjusting our habits, inviting each other into routines we had lived alone for years. The first real test came quietly. I had a work trip scheduled for Chicago, 5 days. It wasn't the trip itself that mattered. It was the moment I hesitated when booking the return flight. Not because of the schedule or the cost, but because for the first time, I wanted to be somewhere else, with him. I called Daniel that night, pacing the kitchen floor. Do you ever think about? I paused, unsure of how to say it. About what? He asked gently. About not doing this part from 2 different coasts. He was silent for a few beats. Not in hesitation, but in thought. All the time, he said. But I didn't want to push. I didn't want to make this harder than it already is. You're not, I said. You're making it clearer. And just like that, the conversation began. It wasn't about one of us packing up our life and leaving everything behind. It wasn't about rushing into a shared apartment. It was about possibility. About what it would look like to stop building bridges and, instead, stand on the same side of the river. We didn't decide that night. But something had shifted. Later that week, he sent me a photo of a small house he'd seen on his walk, a cozy little place with ivy on the porch and a red mailbox. Daniel, don't worry, not trying to buy a house tomorrow. But this made me think of you. Of us. And I felt it, deep in my chest. I started imagining Sunday mornings not just as a fantasy, but as a rhythm. I started noticing how every time I reached for my phone to tell him something, it wasn't because I missed him, it was because I felt like I was already sharing life with him. One night, during a video call, he said, "You know what scares me?" I shook my head, that this could be everything we ever dreamed of, and still get lost because we waited too long. I looked at him and said, "Then let's stop waiting." In the weeks that followed, we started planning. Slowly. Realistically. Kindly. Because love, I was learning, doesn't have to be frantic to be true. He came back to Boston again. Then I went to Portland. We started meeting halfway, New York, Denver, little towns in between. Places that became markers in our timeline. We celebrated my birthday in a cabin in Vermont. He brought me a small leather-bound notebook and, inside, wrote, "This time, I won't lose you in a crowd." We had our first fight over something silly, what movie to watch on a rainy Saturday. But even in that, I saw something beautiful, how he stayed. How we both listened. How no part of the argument felt like the end of anything, only the deepening of something that could be real. There were moments of fear, of course. What if the rhythm faded? What if the magic disappeared once the newness wore off? But love doesn't. Live in the new. It lives in the ordinary. I in the grocery lists. In the text me when you land. In the want me to pick up oat milk. In the I saved the last bite for you. And slowly, our love moved from being a memory in the clouds to something rooted in the earth. Steady. Grounded. Growing. One night, sitting on my couch with his head in my lap, Daniel looked up and said, "You ever think about how all of this began with a storm?" I smiled, and turbulence. He laughed. "Maybe that's what we are," he said. Two people who found calm in the middle of chaos. And I thought, maybe love isn't about avoiding the turbulence, maybe it's about who reaches for your hand when the sky goes dark. Sometimes, I still think about the plane, about that window seat. The hum of the engine. The way the clouds looked like mountains in the sky. The seatbelt light flickering on just before the turbulence began. The quiet panic I tried to hide. The hand that reached for mine before I even asked. I never imagined that a flight, just 8 hours long, would echo across my life like that, but it did. It changed everything. Years later, I sat down to record an episode of a podcast I'd been invited to speak on. They wanted stories about unexpected love. Missed connections. Things that stayed, and I told them mine. I told them about the VU 127, about how we met. How we lost each other. And how, somehow, life circled us back when we were finally ready. I didn't name him. I didn't need to, because the truth of it wasn't in the names, it was in the way he looked at me across a tray table with that quiet, careful attention. The way he listened to my silences. The way he remembered the smallest details, like how I always twisted the strap of my backpack when I was nervous. Now, when people ask me if I believe in fate, I never quite know what to say, because I don't think this was fate. I think it was a choice, over and over again. To right. To listen. To fly. To show up. Love didn't just happen to us, we built it. Letter by letter. Visit by visit. Flight by flight, and now we live in a little place just outside Boston. Yes, Daniel moved 6 months ago. We didn't make a big deal out of it. No fanfare. No boxes stacked to the ceiling. Just one day, I handed him a drawer. Then a toothbrush. Then a side of the closet. Now he fills the spaces I didn't even realize were empty. He makes pancakes on Sundays. I alphabetize the spice rack, badly, but with heart. We argue over laundry and always make up before bed. We leave sticky notes for each other in the fridge, in books, on mirrors. He still takes photos of me when I'm not looking, and sometimes I catch him smiling at me across the kitchen like he can't believe I'm real. I smile back. Because I can't believe it either. Every now and then, when a plane flies overhead, we both look up, and I know exactly what he's thinking. He'll squeeze my hand, still the same way, and I'll say, "Can you believe it?" And he'll answer, "I always could." Even when I didn't know how. There's a framed photo in our hallway now. It's not of us. It's of clouds, thick, layered, dramatic. Taken from 30,000 feet. Underneath it, a small caption in Daniel's handwriting, "The sky where we met." And beneath that, in mine, the beginning of everything. So if you're listening to this now, and you've ever felt like love slipped through your fingers, like the moment passed and it's too late to get it back, let me be the voice that tells you otherwise, because sometimes, the person you met once, briefly, impossibly, doesn't stay gone. Sometimes, they find you again, and sometimes, you find each other right where you left off, in the middle of a storm, still reaching for one another, still holding on, still flying.